The Ordinary Discussion Podcast.
So this quote is like perfectly describes how I've felt about this whole thing. He says in Forgotten God, to be honest, I believe part of the desire to know God's will for my life is birthed in fear and results in paralysis. We are scared to make mistakes, so we fret over figuring out God's will. And I have felt like that for so many years. It's like this wanting to move forward and wanting to do whatever it is he wants me to do, but not being sure if I've heard him right. So then I don't move at all. And it's like, I just would rather not do anything than do the wrong thing. And I think that sometimes people look at God's will in that way. It's like, well, I don't know his whole plan. So instead, I'm just going to do nothing. And I'm just going to stay where I'm at, until I have this lightning strike and this voice from a burning bush or whatever that kind of shows me what to do. When really all he wants is just for us to spend time with him and to come to him and to be with him. And I think we talked about it before the podcast, what Jeremy Duggan said one time on a podcast. And he said his presence is the purpose. Like, we want to know God's purpose. We want to know his will. And God's like, my purpose for your life is my presence. Like, just come and be in my presence. And from there, I'll reveal myself to you and I'll reveal, more of what I want you to do.
Yeah, it's a presence-driven life, not a purpose-driven life. And from the presence, you get purpose. You just said that. That's so true, and it's so important to me. And it's what we're pointing people to in this Holy Spirit session. It's what we point people to in intimacy. And instead of because here's the deal. Francis Chan says, we ask, what is God's will for our life, is often used as an excuse for disobedience. It allows us to put off obedience today for the someday, instead of just asking him what he wants us to do in the next 10 minutes. Right. And I can tell you in my own life, I know that I put off obedience saying, well, I'm waiting on the big plan. Yeah. What's God's purpose in my life? But if your goal is to walk out his purpose, which is everybody's goal, then the step to do that is to get into his presence. And then we can say, okay, I'm in your presence. Now I can hear from you. I've turned down the volume. I'm willing to put myself into an uncomfortable spot. Now, what are you calling me to in the next 10 minutes? And so maybe I'll leave this podcast and go to Starbucks or go to lunch, and he'll tell me to say something to the waiter. That's uncomfortable. I had to turn on the volume to hear it. And that's what he's called me to in the next 10 minutes. And maybe that turns into something. Like for me, and I'll just give my example, it's not a pat on my back or anything. It was just my example. I just heard him call me to lead a Bible study. Now, of course, I thought God had, and this is pride, but I thought God had a big plan for me. Like, it wasn't a Bible study. Like, I just felt like he was calling me to something more than that. Like, I was willing to give more than that, And some of it was I just felt like I wanted to give more than that. And some of it was, I'm sure, pride. But that was the next step I had to take for him to reveal the vision of ordinary men and ordinary women to me in my heart. And so if I hadn't taken that step, and then if I hadn't taken the step of inviting the guys, and then once the guys were invited, then start, hearing the voice of God say, hey, you would name your business. Why are you calling this the Bible study? Name it, like give it a name. And so we started calling it Ordinary Men. And then from there it grew and grew. Like, he never gave the entire plan, but it's no different than in my business life as well, or any other areas of my life. Like, when I started in real estate business, it was get your real estate license, learn real estate. Okay. And make some money selling real estate. Great. Then it was, okay, why don't you flip a house or two? And then it was, okay, why don't you flip more houses? Okay, now why don't you start a brokerage? And okay. And before you know it, it's like 10, 15 businesses. It's all these other, and it was just like, I followed the success. And then I got away from the failure. So it was like, oh, fail, I'll go away from that. I'll follow success. Yeah. Fail. I think it's the exact same way in our spiritual walk and what God calls us to do. But we overcomplicate it, and we want to see the end before we start in the beginning. And a
lot of times we miss out on the big because we ignore the little.
Oh, for sure.
We ignore his voice, when he asks us to do the small things. And so we're missing out on the bigger opportunity to be used.
Yeah. Yep.
Thankfully, he gives us lots of chances.
Yeah, thank God.